excited to have our next guest join us. State Senator Chris Larson is here. Good morning, sir. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, Chris, you must be muted. Oh, that was Calvin.
Um,
Now we got
oh,
you.
there you go. Thank you for having me. Good to be on.
Glad to have you here. It is dry January, of course, and that's one of the things that we wanted to talk about. And at least from my perspective as an older person, the
Mhm.
attitude about drinking has really started to change, especially in the last decade. This, at least to my estimation, is not a bad thing. There are more and more. There's a sober section now at Lambeau Field. There are more and more bars that are catering to people who do not drink,
Mhm.
and that's kind of a counter to Wisconsin is still terrible when it comes to binge drinking.
Yeah, that's still a problem. But I think people are changing for sure. I was out this Saturday and ordered off the non-alcoholic menu because I'm doing dry January, and was happy because there was a lot of different options. And I realized looking around the bar that half the people at this bowling alley were also drinking non-alcoholic. So I was
Really?
pleasantly surprised to be like, oh, okay, there's actually a lot of folks who were going about this. Half the people that are with were on that same route, still going out, still socializing, but recognizing that you don't need to drink your face off every single time that you go out. Dry January is just a chance to just reset and get back to level and realize, okay, especially after the holidays, it might be a good chance to level set and restore your tolerance to a more human level.
But that's just such a positive thing, Chris, or Senator Larson, because again, when I was in the bars in my 20s, if you didn't drink, if you didn't order a drink, it was like you're not drinking. Like
Yeah.
you have a character flaw.
Sure. Yeah, and I think there's strength in numbers because a lot of folks you don't have to do that every single time. And definitely, there's a time and place, and I'm not going to try and act like I'm going to be here trying to push a new prohibition movement. I live in Wisconsin, so I
Right,
can I
right,
can hold
right.
my own. And I definitely, when I talk to friends from the other part of the country, where it's what we just think of as casual drinking here, the rest of the folks in the country do think of as alcoholism as being okay. You can't get together for a baptism without having a cooler full of Miller Lights. It's like, well, we could, but we just don't.
Yeah.
So I think recognizing and just to be clear, folks are free to make their own decisions. You want to make sure that you're on the healthy side of that, and friends, family should be stepping in if you are going over it. Particularly, we had a event here at the Capitol, a vigil. For people who are victims of reckless driving and inebriated driving in the state. So, drunk driving, I think, is just the way that most people look at it. But obviously, um, there's other forms where people are taking an edible and then getting on the road, or doing other harder drugs. And that's something we want to bring attention to. We have anywhere from 200 to 300 people we lose every single year in this state. And unfortunately, a person tends to commit drunk driving 80 times before they end up being caught, by one statistic, which is just stunning. One in 10 people in this,
80 times.
yeah,
That's insane.
yes, but I think it's a large part because we treat drunk driving as a moving violation in the law. So you can get pulled over for drunk driving, but it's equivalent of like a speeding ticket. Whereas other places have mandated court appearances, where it is a misdemeanor or higher. You could have a $10,000 fine, a year in prison. We don't have any of that, and frankly, when a person's first interaction with the law is okay, you're just called and get a ride, and you just have to pay a fine. People think, well, that spreads, especially in a bar. Next time a person's there, oh yeah, I got pulled over, but there was no real consequence. What we want to do is change that so that there is a consequence. My proposal that I introduce session after session is having an ignition interlock device installed on every vehicle where a person is found guilty of drunk driving. It creates a barrier where people then cannot start their vehicle unless they are purely sober. And these things have stopped 400,000 rides over a 10-year period where somebody got behind the wheel, blew and the car would not start. So it is literally keeping dangerous people off of the roads and preventing tragedies from happening.
Well, and I think of all the number of stories that I've seen over the years, because I've been doing this a long time, people who are on their ninth DUI, their
Yeah.
10th or 11th or 12th DUI. And you just said that that's probably just a small fraction of the many, many other times that they have been driving drunk and just fortunately didn't hurt anybody.
Right, right, exactly. So this is it's a huge problem. I stood with a number of families at the vigil who, they lost somebody who never even got to the age. There was one who lost their son, Lewis, who he never even reached the age of legal drinking age, because he was on his way to a campsite and somebody was going 90 miles an hour, repeat offender, took his life. There was another where a woman was walking with her friend and another car was going 80 miles an hour, cleared through them, and never looked back. And it upended her life and her friend that was with her. It killed her and it upended the life of the friend that was with her. And these happened within the last 5 years. So if had we had better drunk driving laws on the books, I'm confident that there's lives would have not have been shattered. So Mothers Against Drunk Driving helped coordinate this. They helped coordinate the action on this. And there's no reason why Wisconsin has to have the worst drunk driving laws in the country. We can do what other states have done ahead of us and have common sense. You can have a drink. Drink as much as you want. Just make a plan on how you're going to be able to get home, and driving should not be a part of the equation.
Wisconsin State Senator Chris Larson is our guest, and we're talking kind of a combination of things: drunk driving in Wisconsin, binge drinking in Wisconsin, dry January as well. You mentioned this measure, Senator, that you've introduced numerous times about having ignition, something connected to the ignition where you have to breathe into it, and if you blow a certain point, the car won't start.
Yep.
Who is stopping that measure?
Well, the law. So we don't have that in place. We have it for repeat offenders. So if somebody gets a second offense, or if they blow and their alcohol content is double the legal limit, then they'll have that installed on their vehicle for a year. But us changing the law, I mean, the biggest one's probably the Tavern League ends up rallying against the legislature from doing anything. I think they're a paper tiger. They don't have as much strength as they used to. And frankly, if you remember, one of the big things that they pushed back in 2008 was against the smoking ban, of saying people wouldn't go out to bars if they ended up changing this. They're singing they're singing a song from the same hymnal of trying to say that if they change the drunk driving laws, and then people won't go out and drink. That I have no illusions that Wisconsin will continue to have a drinking culture, and just changing the law will not change that. It is just a matter of saying you need to figure out, make sure you've got a plan for Uber, for Lyft, for have somebody to pick you up, to take the bus. That's it. Before you take your first step, figure out how you're getting home. And that's the change that we are looking for, and frankly, that's the change that most people in the state want to see. It's just a matter of contacting their legislators and saying, "Hey, on a bipartisan basis, let's just do this. Let's adjust and frankly enter the 21st century, if not belatingly."
I think one of the things we speak about is the changing attitudes. It's also how we teach maybe the younger people, the young people. I sound so old. Because I see that I work at a comedy club, and the jokes on stage about DUIs and it being a rite of passage in Wisconsin, and the fact that you get maybe the third one will stick, and the data that was released, it's been released twice now, about the 50 drunkest counties in the United States of America, Wisconsin. It's like, yeah, we got 40 of them. And I remember you coming out, I don't know if it was a video or an article, saying this is nothing to be proud of, and it doesn't make us look good to the rest of the country and the world. And it's about also messaging to young people. And I think also, as you said, Jane, like younger people I don't believe they're drinking as much as we did when we were younger, because I think there's far more to do too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and that's it. It's just a matter of having other options, than just going out and drinking your face off and doing a keg stand. It's like there's a time and place for that. It's like it's college, and then that's it. If you do it a little bit older, your liver is going to give out, and you see it with people's health. So that's why I think, why it makes sense to give a shot at dry January, and then to figure out what a good balance is. I will say, speaking of the changing attitudes, I do think one of the reasons why I think having a required ignition interlock device on all drunk drivers' cars is it changes that, Greg. So like, it's one thing to be able to say, hey, I got a drunk driving, and there's no consequence. It's another thing where you have to explain it to your date, of why you have to blow into a tube before you start the car, right?
Yeah.
Or you have to explain it to your daughter's friend when she gets in the car because it's your turn to do the carpool. Why you've got to blow into a tube or pull over, as this is how the technology works. It'll give you an alert where you have 2 minutes to pull over and blow positive while it's going, because I'm sure, if you travel in the same circles, the 10-20 years ago, the ignition interlock device was just, okay, start your car, leave it in the parking lot, go and drink, or you have your buddy in the car with you who's a designated blower, starts all the cars. Like that. Guess what? Technology has adjusted, so that does not work anymore. And it creates a consequence, and just having to explain it to your kid, to your date, to your buddies, like that's enough. That's enough for them to think, yeah, maybe I don't want one of these installed on my new car.
Well, and I think the Tavern League is missing out on an opportunity to make themselves the hero in this, because they get a lot of criticism. For one thing, why do you want to encourage this kind of behavior when all it's doing is killing more potential customers? That's never made any sense to me. And if the Tavern League actually came out in support of and worked in conjunction with rideshare programs and other things like that, they could come out the heroes in this instead of being the villains.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. I think that there is, if there is a push, if there's momentum, and this happens every cycle, then we have bipartisan support to actually get something done. So I'm hopeful that this will be the time where we actually do it. I mean, there's so many different tragedies. It literally touches every one of our districts. So hopefully we can get something done with that.
And you
I
mentioned
know that I will say that the governor introduced this in his budget last time too. So he's on board with it, and so he may mention it tonight.
And you had mentioned, Senator Larson, that people should call their constituents because it makes a difference, right? Because I think a lot of people think, yeah, I'm going to call and leave a message and he's going to ignore me and it's not going to matter.
No, man, you'd be surprised. I mean, you just heard my phone ring in the background, but we get calls. It makes a difference, especially now that most people don't pick up the phone. Everyone texts, right? This is an easy call to make. You just call and say, hey, guess what? I'm your boss. This is where I live. This is where I stand on it, and I would like to know where my legislator stands on it. Here's my number. Call me back. Thanks. That's it. And it makes a difference, and it can have an impact. And we work for you.
As we always say, if you're going to call, be polite. Don't swear. You just make yourself look bad. We're going to continue our conversation with State Senator Chris Larson, and we're going to talk about education in Wisconsin. State of the State is tonight. Stay close. You are listening to Matenaer on Air. This is the Civic Media Radio Network. Good morning. Welcome back to Matenaer on Air. Jane Matenaer, Greg Bach, Dr. Slide on the board, coming to you from our studio here at Radio Park in Racine. Join us, call or text at 855-752-4842. Leave a comment on the live stream on Facebook, YouTube, and what used to be Twitter. An hour from now, we'll wrap up the show as we always do with This Shouldn't Be a Thing. Today it is the Good edition. Stick around for that. Also, just a reminder, we do have some light snow falling here in Racine and around parts of the state. Go to 511wi.gov. This is going to bring up a whole map of the entire state with all the accidents everywhere. And so if you're going to be hitting the roads, it's always a good idea to check this before you head out the door. Looks like we have a big crash right now around the Columbus area. There are a number of scattered accidents around Milwaukee, Oconomowoc, and Madison. So just be careful as you head out the door this morning. Go to 511wi.gov and take a look. Make sure that you can avoid some of the mess out there on the freeways. We're joined by Wisconsin State Senator Chris Larson is here, and we're heading into a new budget, heading into a new season, and education certainly is a big conversation here, Senator Larson. What do you expect to see going forward now that we have a little. It's a little fairer in the legislation right now, at least as far as representation is concerned. Are we actually going to get something done?
Fairer, yes, that is the correct term. Yeah, we're not quite fair at 50-50 state, but it's a 54-45 split in the assembly, and we're still down 3 seats in the Senate, as far as the way that the split goes. So, anybody's guess is as good as anyone else's. I think that there's a hope that given closer numbers that would tend to moderate and say, okay, let's find a middle where we can figure out how to work on at least things that we all agree on. We mentioned drunk driving. Talking about funding public education would be another one. Making sure that there's a common sense approach to a lot of different things, like reducing prices for folks, raising wages for people. But unfortunately, we haven't seen that yet. There's just been a move to try and limit people's access to voting. There's going to be a new constitutional amendment. So we will see. I remain hopeful that we'll actually try and get some things done. Public education is my number one priority. I'm hoping that the governor, having a superintendent background, will be something that he picks up. But a lot of our school districts, unfortunately, have fallen behind in terms of funding because the state continues to thin out their budgets, force them to go to referendum and put it all on property taxes.
I saw something yesterday, and I forget whose office it came out of. It was a Wisconsin Republican demanding more oversight over the students' results. But it always seems like those kinds of things only affect public schools. Never voucher schools or charter schools. They're good. We don't need to look over what they do and their results, right? Even though now taxpayers get the good pleasure of funding them too.
Well, we've had that for 30 years, one of the oldest voucher systems in the country. And it started as an experiment. And here we are 30 years on, and we are still treating it with kid gloves. But it is on track to dismantle the rest of the public school system. Folks might not realize this, but by the end of this budget cycle, if nothing else changes, the amount of reimbursement that voucher schools get will be higher in high schools by thousands of dollars than what your local public school gets. And they get their money directly from the state coffers, where there's no input by local officials at all in how it is allocated. They just get it. We've, in my office, have tried to focus this on just special education funding, because the discrepancy is the difference between 90% that
Yes.
vouchers get reimbursed versus public schools. Do you know what it is for public schools?
I'm afraid. 15?
Wasn't it? I feel like I heard 10.
10. Oh, well, you're making me look like we're very generous coming from the state, but it is 30% that we are getting. So 90% for voucher schools getting from the state, 30%, and that has a huge impact because public schools end up taking more students with disabilities
Right.
who have special needs, and so if they're not reimbursed entirely for their cost, that comes out of teaching every other kid in that school. So we've seen that effect. So we put out a petition last week, Wisconsin Public Education Network. We pushed it yesterday from my office to say, hey, the governor needs to make up for this. Half the referendums that we keep seeing cycle after cycle wouldn't be necessary if we funded special ed. So even if you think this doesn't affect you because your kid does not get special ed, it does. It does in the form of bigger class sizes and smaller budgets.
And and tell me if I'm wrong, these kinds of moves overwhelmingly impact rural districts because they don't have a lot of options for schools. In a lot of those areas, the public school is the heart of the community. That's where they meet. That's where everybody's kids go. That's where the sports happen. That's where, and they don't have 5 charter schools to pick from.
Right. Yeah. And having the loss of a handful of students there means the way that the budget is written, that they're missing out on tens of thousands of dollars every time they're losing a few students. So that is going to spell the end of a lot of rural schools, which is why, other states like Texas have not started a voucher program, because in Tennessee, they've looked at Wisconsin, they've seen what happens to rural schools, and they say, we're going to take a pass. Even in states where that's predominantly Republican, they're like, we know this is going to hurt rural schools the most.
Yeah, if you don't think vouchers are a big deal, look at what's happening in Arizona and Tennessee in particular. And Governor Bill Lee in Tennessee isn't giving up on funding voucher schools. We're out of time. Senator Chris Larson has been our guest. Thank you so very, very much, sir. Really appreciate your time. We'd love to have you back.
My pleasure. Thank you. Stay warm.